Let's talk VDML with KJR.
Okay, welcome to Let's Talk VDML. These are practical conversations about trusted AI adoption. This podcast, Marek, this is our 20th episode, is brought to you by KJR, Australia's trusted advisor in software, quality engineering and AI innovation. I am Kelvin Ross, I'm the CEO of KJR. In each episode, we dive into the challenges and opportunities of responsible trusted AI adoption, governance and assurance. And we invite industry experts like Marek and other thought leaders along to join us in those conversations. If you enjoy these conversations, please don't forget to like, subscribe and stay connected. Today, we're welcoming our guest, Marek Kowalkiewicz, author of The Economy of Algorithms, AI and the Rise of Digital Minions. He's QUT Professor specializing in digital economy and AI. Marek, what an exciting time we're in.
It is. It's every day, every week, something new's happening, right? So I'm really curious to see what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah. Like I often, I keep having to remind myself, even had a long career like yourself and thinking, holy, everything's led to this interesting time where, AI and technology is really, making dramatic changes. So I guess, is it like your career that you've been positioning this moment or your career? Tell us a bit about your background and how you got to this point.
Oh, look, when you look back, the dots start to connect, right? And it's almost magical when you see them connecting. I'm not sure if it's unique to where we are at the moment. Would it be the same if we were in a sort of slightly different reality? Not sure, but they definitely do connect at the moment. I'm a bit concerned the moment you said it's been a long career, but yeah, it's been a while. I've been in this field for probably about 25 years now. I started teaching teaching artificial intelligence as a research assistant at my university. That was, I think, in 2001, so almost 25 years ago. It was a really exciting time because when I was teaching it, that was the sort of the initial growth of neural network, not yet deep learning, not yet deep neural networks, but just seeing all the amazing possibilities that we had there. Obviously, there was a tiny bit of a AI winter coming after that, where we realized the compute power is not big enough to do much more beyond things like OCR and maybe some very, very basic, so optical character recognition or some very basic audio processing. But yeah, it was exciting. And, I started with playing with computers a bit earlier than that. I had my computers, which I still own, still have at home, my Atari 800 XL. That was back in 85, I believe. So that was, the year when I wrote my first 2 lines of code, 10 print hello Marek, 20 go to 10, right? So that's it was the era of go to
20 back then. It was like
go to that's right. Go to statements were not forbidden, right, back then.
Thanks for tuning into this episode where we're going to talk about practical AI assurance. Make sure you head over to our website, check out our events page. There's heaps of AI events on there, AI assurance, AI governance, AI guardrails, AI everything. Check it out right here. Make sure you like and subscribe so you don't miss any of our epic episodes of AI assurance.
Back then. And then, for the remaining 20 years after 2001 or so, I started to shift a bit toward the business of technology and the business of artificial intelligence. So I'm one of those people who sort of could probably still write code. Like if I need to, I can write a few lines of code, although who needs to write code these days? Unless you're a professional software developer, that has to do things that Gen AI cannot do. But my focus is more these days on helping organizations understand the impact technologies might have on them and help them design those futures where technology is pivotal.
Yeah. Interesting. So that leading up to your book, I'm sort of interested what led up to that because the economy of algorithms. Because in that book you're talking about, and you talked about the AI winter, and you talked about things like robo-debt, and we've seen other
Yep.
systems fail, like recently, where they're, oh my God, AI. But a lot of those systems are not AI. They're things we've had for a while,
Yeah.
but it's like AI is just exploding at the moment. Why do you see this surge in sort of like change in the way we're interacting with systems now? And what's changing now more recently?
Oh, that's a big question. Uh, Look, there's a number of answers to them. First of all, when I wrote the book, and this is the economy of algorithms, not the economy of AI, right? There is an AI in the subtitle, but I did want to highlight that AI is just one set of technologies that are
Mm.
shaping our world, and AI is a subset of the sort of the bigger set
Yep.
of algorithms, and obviously probably the most impactful one. But we also need to remember that those kind of machine deep learning systems are sitting within bigger systems, which are sometimes a bit more deterministic than those tiny systems that are inside them, those machine learning. And it's the whole machine that really matters, right? It's like a spaceship with maybe some
Mm.
magical component in the middle, but it's the entire ship that matters. Why are we seeing the sort of those shifts in society and how we're using technologies? I think, um, like I said, lots of answers, but I'm gonna focus on just one at the moment, and I'm sure we'll touch on other points later on. I think the biggest difference that we're seeing at the moment is we had never had systems that we could interact with so easily, and systems that felt so human in many
Mm.
ways. I mean, kind of by design. When we say
Yeah, yeah.
AI, I understand it's mostly Gen AI, so they feel very, very human. So that's kind of inviting the non-technical people to interact with them as well. Did you know that pretty much 5%, 400 million people use ChatGPT at least once a week, right?
Hmm.
5% of the entire population of the planet, 1 in 20 people interacts with this one particular tool at least once a week. That kind of shows the popularity of those tools already. But there is a big sort of challenge here. All those Gen AI systems, as you and I know, are non-deterministic, right?
Hmm.
They're, just kind of, to use very, very simple computer science language, they're stochastic, right? So, the outputs of those systems are kind of unpredictable in many ways.
Mm.
But what is more concerning is, occasionally, just because they're kind of probabilistic, we can get results that are not true, right? Some people refer to this as hallucination. I have a particular take on that. Sometimes hallucinations are good, but we can talk about it later. The problem is we didn't used to have computers in the past that would sort of occasionally randomly spit out something that's incorrect, and that requires a massive mindset shift. We are kind of wired, no pun intended here, but we're kind of wired to trust machines, computers like Excel.
Mm.
You assume that it always gives you the correct answer, right? If
Hmm.
like, if Excel is 99.999 correct, that's pretty much like being 99.999% correct. This is pretty much like being 0% correct, because suddenly, you cannot really trust that system anymore.
Hmm.
Yet we have this new category of systems that hundreds of millions of people use, and by design, because of their architecture, because how they're created, they're this kind of type of probabilistic system. We don't
Yep.
really understand it yet as a society, and we don't know how to deal with those systems as a society.
I think that's a really interesting point because again, my background was around, a systems engineer from defense and safety
Hmm.
critical systems. So a lot around, program verification and really
Yeah,
trusted systems. But almost by definition, when we say digital systems, we mean 0 or 1, and we're sort of
yeah,
locked in absolute true or absolute false sort of thing, right? And
correct.
and I'm finding now is actually, as we think about the newer systems, is about how do we deal with uncertainty or imprecision, and
Yeah,
what's the larger system that involves the humans to sort of integrate that
yeah.
processing together. Because
So,
also I
so
think this
hmm,
one of the gaps is as we transition some of the traditional human systems away, that uncertainty is embedded in there, but we just accepted that as part of the
Yeah.
process. But now that we're automating it, we're digitalizing it, right? It's
Absolutely right. So in my world of enterprise systems, there is this term single source of truth, right? And you will have those systems where you can absolutely trust them, right? There'll be a central component of an enterprise system, and you know that if you need to find out whether, I don't know, an invoice was paid, what's the kind of stock levels in your warehouses, there is a single source of truth in your organization. That'll be that particular system. What I've started noticing, and it's very concerning to me right now, what I've started to notice is that there are businesses, software developers, organizations that are sort of expanding those systems and adding all sorts of Gen AI capabilities to them. And there was one particular example that I recently saw where somebody said, like, hey, we're ingesting those scanned documents into our enterprise system, and we're using some OCR, but for some aspects where we don't have all the information on the printout that we're scanning, we're going to use Gen AI to complete the missing information, right? This is how you pollute your single source of truth systems, right? And if you don't annotate the data in an appropriate way, it's going to impact some other pieces of data and other pieces of data. And at some stage, you just cannot trust that information anymore because you sort of have no provenance of that information. You don't know whether it's actually coming from hard facts that you scanned, OCR'd, or so on, or maybe from some speculation by a Gen AI system. 95% correct, probably, but the remaining 5% is polluting your system. That's my other worry, right, in this space.
And I think, as we're seeing the foundational models grow and expand, they've exhausted all the world's good data, right, in terms of training these models. And they're left with some really crappy data, like just garbage that people have created on the internet that you actually don't want to train the system on. So now it's this element about, do we use AI to generate new, good, clean data as well? But your point about provenance is really key as well, right?
And there's a concept in research called model autophagy disorder, MAD, model autophagy disorder, which is the result of AI systems training on AI generated data. You could sort of imagine that at some stage you're getting this kind of level of mutations in the models, right? So academics call it a MAD, model autophagy disorder. Everyone else seems to be referring to it as bot shit, right? So the kind of the algorithmic equivalent of bullshit. That's a non-academic but still very formal statement.
Yeah, so interesting. One of the comments you referred to in your book was Asimov's third law, any advanced technology sort of indistinguishable from magic, which I think brings me to the sort of discussion about literacy, where, where is the community, where are our business leaders and so on? Because I often find a lot of people are they're in that magic phase, or they really don't understand their processes, and I find there's two things that can go wrong at that early stage. One is they just believe it can do everything. I've been in so many workshops. We'll just AI that bit, and you go, well, and the other side is, well, the minute it produces the wrong thing, and again, that uncertainty, they completely write off the technology as well, right? So back on literacy, where's your gut feel around where Australia's at, both in the community and say with our businesses and organizations around AI?
There's a lot of people who experiment with those technologies at the moment, and I've already shared some numbers. There are very few people, very, very, very few people who have an understanding of that technology that they need to work with it in the right way. So I've had many conversations with executives who would say, hey, I'm using, there was one where I had a conversation and they said, hey, I'm using ChatGPT for market research. And then I asked, how do you validate the responses that ChatGPT gives you? And then the person said, what do you mean validate? They wouldn't even, have that assumption that the responses might be made up, might be wrong, might be incorrect, might be out of date, and so on, right? So, and this is that one side of the coin, right? Where we think it's magic, we think it's the smartest thing ever, and we just put full trust in it.
Yeah.
Without realizing that, there might be issues. This is the reason I gave my book a subtitle, The Rise of the Digital Minions, because it was literally a nod to that movie, with Minions, where they're very helpful. They're full of energy. They can do great things, but if you don't stick around, if you don't try to oversee them, disasters will happen, right? And so now when a disaster happens, like you said, we go into this kind of the opposite side of the coin, and we say, okay, let's just not touch it anymore, right? This is a knee-jerk reaction, and this is possibly one of the worst decisions you could make as a manager, right? If your employee made a mistake, you don't fire them immediately, right? You try to understand, well, maybe that's not their set of skills. Maybe I can move them to another area, or maybe I can work with them and make sure that those mistakes do not happen in the past, right? That's sort of the approach you should also consider when it comes to those technologies, right? Don't immediately dismiss the whole category of those technologies just because one tool makes one particular type of mistakes.
Yeah. So what we're seeing, and we were discussing about how, traditionally we're a technology company, but now having to get involved much earlier with our customers, probably like some of the workshops that you run, and those ideation workshops are, one of those early stages, looking at what are, valuable use cases, but also things that are feasible, things that you can manage your risk and so on. But there's a big literacy bit even leading into that, right? Because you've got to get everybody into a mindset around a common understanding, because they're probably not even posing the right question until they've got an understanding, a fundamental understanding of that technology. Is that how are you sort of dealing with that with your engagements and other customers?
There are some organizations that come to us and say, hey, Marek, we want to deploy AI in our operations. Can you help us with that? Right?
Yeah.
And our immediate reaction is, why do you need AI in your operations, right? Is this just because somebody told you that AI is great? And we work with those organizations to truly understand how they operate. What are some potential areas where AI might make sense? And only then we will have those conversations. It's very, very important to have the right approach. I've seen organizations which would deploy AI systems where non-AI systems would be much better placed, right? But it's the vibe, it's the hype. So we also want to be AI first. So that's a very risky approach. Once again, there's the flip side of it, where boards of organizations are just, have heard too much about hallucinations, do not really understand that, some challenges of generative AI can be managed and can be managed very well. And they put a sort of a complete, stop to any, AI initiatives, right? And then again, we work with them to bring up that literacy and say like, hey, of course, but take hallucinations as an example, right? I've mentioned this so many times already. We actually recommend systems that hallucinate to groups or to teams that are tasked with strategy development. In strategy development, you need to develop potential scenarios of the future. You need to sort of, expand your thinking. Go back to the quote that you mentioned. Go beyond what's possible, right? To explore what's impossible, because then you can take a step back and say, like, hey, so I've really ventured far outside of what's possible, but now I can really, push those boundaries with the ideas that are still kind of on this side of the, the boundaries of the possible.
And I think that's where it's really important in those, ideation sessions is really rethinking what is that relationship like. And, in the medical space where we do a bit of work, people often fall into that diagnosis thing. But I think if you think about the doctor automation collaboration, I think it's the last thing you want to do is the computer puts forward the diagnosis, because you could easily fall into automation bias, right? Of just you get lazy and start confirming it. So is there really a different way that, the doctor maybe proposes their diagnosis and the computer's really exploring those other areas, right? Looking for alternative explanations and sort of maybe posing those as questions to the doctor. Hey, you thought this, but and normally it's seeding those ideas. They can then do the reasoning about it and go, oh, that's relevant, or that's not relevant. But you don't just want to fire at everything, but something that's really specific to context and helping to explore. So I think it's those things, that really thinking clearly about the human, automation interaction, right? And you talk about that a lot in your book, about designing that process.
Well, look, it's a whole spectrum, right? We tend to think in those binary terms of either I use something or not. So from non-use to full automation, but everything in between is the augmentation, right? Of an augmentation of a human and technology. And in the medical field, it's absolutely fantastic what's happening at the moment. And I think we might need another term, not just automation, not just augmentation, but also amplification, right? Sort of, being able to sort of bring up some of the knowledge and skills that a doctor would normally have no practical access to. Imagine, being able to use those tools, like, deep research is a theme of the month. Imagine being able to use deep research tools as a doctor to analyze all the most recent research about a particular condition that a patient has. I'm not asking the system to make a decision. I'm asking the system to summarize the most recent findings, kind of point me to maybe some papers that might be of particular relevance. And then as a human, I still get to make the decision, right? But I'm using those tools as a massive amplification of my skills. And I'm very excited about the possibilities in this space.
I think so, because even that definition of AI, I've been hearing some stuff recently about some people calling it machine intelligence. What we're looking for is, there's some things that digital systems are just really good at doing in terms of dealing with large scales of data. And medical records now, there's a huge amount of data behind that patient, right? And you can just see that the doctors don't have the time and attention to drill down into the detail. So they need a intelligent machine that can actually go looking for those things that they're asking it to sort of go and find, whether it's relevant or not. And I think switching that away from, we're building an AI that's a doctor. No, we're not doing that. We're building machine intelligence that amplifies the doctor, I think.
Correct. There is a risk in this space, though, that I need to talk to. There was a very recent research published a couple of months ago that compared doctors and some custom trained Gen AI systems in terms of their ability to produce a correct diagnosis of a patient based on the systems and the informations that they had access to. This won't be surprising in 2025 that the researchers have shown that the system was a bit better than doctors at diagnosing patient, giving access to all of the documentation of the history of the patient, right? So that was interesting. But what was even more interesting, so let me say it explicitly, doctors were worse than those custom trained systems at diagnosing patients. What was even more surprising is, when you gave doctors access to that very same Gen AI system that was better than them, and then you got the doctors to work with the system to issue a diagnosis, that was actually worse than the doctors themselves. Right?
Interesting.
So you give a doctor a tool, and the doctor is suddenly worse than a doctor without a tool. Why is that? Well, turns out that those doctors didn't know how to work with those
Yeah.
tools, didn't know how to prompt them. So they
Yep.
would just give the documentations and say, what's the diagnosis, right?
Yep.
That's not how you get access to, to a high quality answer, right? You need to engage with the system. You need to learn how to prompt them properly. So back to our conversation about AI literacy. Yes, just giving somebody a hammer doesn't mean that they'll be a good carpenter, right? You still
Yeah.
need to give them that understanding of how to work with a tool.
Yeah, I think so. That's definitely that coming back to that magic thing is you've got to train the person that's interacting with the AI enough understanding that they understand how the algorithm's deriving information, what are the risks inherent in it, and a
Yep.
lot of times, those like emission errors and things like that are really hard to pick up on, right? It's when you expected the machine to actually find that information, that's missed it and things like that. They're really hard errors to detect. It's much easier to detect a hallucination that it's just come up with some crazy idea, but the fact that it missed something, really important is. But yeah, you've got to train that skepticism in the user, right? And how do you? I think the other thing we find is that automation bias and confirmation bias sort of the longer the system's in place and being used, people become more complacent over time, right? So how do you maybe design a system that maybe injects errors into the process and keeps monitoring the human? How efficient are you on actually picking up when this thing's, not doing the right thing? It's
And there's a lot we can learn from defense in this space. Defense is the type of industry that tries to prepare for situations that happen very rarely, right? And so they do all sorts of drills, right? They say, let's imagine the enemy is attacking our country, right? Let's imagine that, and let's perform that. So those drills are very important. We do drills in all walks of life, right? Really trying to understand how to behave in particular unexpected situations. Perhaps we need to start introducing those drills in this space as well, right? And this is not something unusual. I get those phishing emails every couple of weeks. Some of them are sent by my IT department, just trying to see how I react, right? So it's definitely already worked into business processes and work processes. We could do the same with Gen AI.
Yeah. I think what I'm finding so far with some of, I think a lot of organizations, you're still in that early adopter phase for a lot of things, but a lot of people aren't thinking about what those monitoring processes are. So even like what information do I capture to continue to evaluate the performance of any algorithms or any process that I might be doing? Any sort of examples of that?
This is very true. It's an emerging field. That's all I can say at the moment. And even in my team here at Queensland University of Technology, we're designing those. We call them arenas. Those tools where we can sort of put humans against Gen AI systems to understand which of them is more effective, which of them is more efficient, right? Whatever KPIs we're interested in, but also in comparing individual systems, so sort of benchmarking, right? Now, in the public sphere, we have a number of benchmarks for Gen AI tools, but those are very generic benchmarks, right? What we're working on at the moment are benchmarks that are specific to an organization and specific to a particular task or a use case where a Gen AI system is being used, right? So to give you a kind of a rough idea, we have an organization that has to deal with very, very complex, very lengthy medical reports, often produced by more than two parties. Right. So kind of like an adversarial situation where you have two doctors talking about a health condition of a particular person, but those doctors might be, for whatever reason, slightly biased, right? So the role of this organization is to go through all of the reports and find out where they agree, where they disagree, and then explore. So far, it's being done by humans, but the organization is now exploring the use of Gen AI. What we're doing is we're now saying, okay, let's imagine a new model comes out. is that model going to be better than your current model, or maybe your humans and so on? So that ability to compare systems, this is not something that's available broadly to every organization. Some organizations have their own custom processes to do it.
Yeah.
Others will have to rely on sort of off-the-shelf tools that are not there just yet, but I expect them to start popping up over the next year or two.
Yeah, a lot of what we find with a bunch of customers, there's obviously LLMs, computer vision models and things like that, and they kind of expect the off-the-shelf stuff is just going to work for them, and I don't think they take into account as much the domain shift, from what that was trained on to their sort of situation, right? And we had this with there was a really good sort of like sepsis prediction algorithm, produced out of America and published, and could give 24 hours advance notice for deteriorating patients. But to actually transfer that, well, how do we first of all validate it on our data, given we treat patients differently and things like that? And different ICU units, some are burned, so way infections develop is quite different. And this idea that there's this one generic model that supports the whole world, I think, is a bit of a misnomer. And I think people underestimate that calibration bit that they've probably got to do for their organization. Have you sort of come across that sort of experience?
In a broader sense, yes. I do not have enough experience in medical systems to comment on this type of systems specifically in that industry, but in the broader sense, absolutely. So what we're seeing right now, especially when it comes to large language models, most of the ones that we interact with have been trained on Western sets of data. And this is really interesting, right? Because in some ways they represent the Western culture. I don't really want to use the word bias, because it's not necessarily bias. It's just simply a cultural sort of expression, right? Of how a particular part of the world communicates, thinks about things, names things, and so on. But more and more we need to start to understand that there are other parts of the world, other cultures, and and those systems are not directly transferable to those, right? They will have those quirky misbehaviors, the way a person from one country sort of misbehaves in quotation marks when they move into another one. Maybe they smile at somebody where it's sort of not expected, right? Maybe they tip and the other person feels offended because they're not a slave, right? You know what I mean, right? Like in that culture, maybe tipping is not something that you see as favorable. And so we'll see that exactly the same type of challenge with the sort of transfer of those Gen AI systems and application of those in those cultures that are not necessarily your typical sort of cultures that are open to the Western cultures, or like not that compatible with those. So we'll see more and more of that.
I think even in Western cultures, even that generative stuff with large language models, the way someone would communicate in Australia in an email is very different to where I'm living now, even in Canada, right? We're almost the same culture, but we'd write in a different style. But
that's right.
One of that domain shift things was, like it turns out like large language models are state of the art now in terms of taking a document and removing or identifying private PII, personally identifiable information, and extracting that out. But when we use some of the off-the-shelf tools, we found that they just didn't perform that well on some Australian data, right? Because again, those localization issues and things like that, all our Aboriginal place names and things like that, it's
very much so.
It confused it quite a bit. And but you could actually optimize the system to sort of fine tune it quite well to get it to like almost 3-4 nines type accuracy. It was quite astounding how quickly you can train it.
But then again, Kelvin, this is only a massive issue if you
Mm.
think about those systems as fully autonomous,
Yeah, yeah,
non-supervised systems. If
yeah,
you kind of loop them into human work, you always have
yeah,
that opportunity to, correct them. And of course, if it's repetitive, then it's
yeah,
either annoying or costly or needs to be addressed. But
yeah.
it's not a make or break, right?
No, no, no.
Those
No, it's
sort
not.
of Australian style emails, you can always edit them, right? If you kind of
Yeah.
send them in Canada,
Well,
right?
that's right, and that design of the human in the loop as well.
Yeah.
But even what we found in a bunch of projects was when we looked at and evaluated the human system.
Hmm.
Yeah, we made this sort of mistake on a project of actually predicting, how long people are going to be in ICU for. So let's look at the
Yeah.
record. How many more days are they checking out today, tomorrow,
Yeah.
or next week, sort of thing? And that's
Yeah.
pretty much what we wanted to predict. And that system was being done manually, where doctors were
Yeah.
putting a date into the system just so they
Hmm.
could feed it through to planning. So it's not a life or death thing, but just
Yeah.
helping to work out,
Yeah.
capacity and workload, but really quite important to the business. And when we first developed the algorithm, we go, oh, this is terrible. It's like 70% accurate,
Yeah.
but then when we went back and actually evaluated the human performance, we
Yeah.
found that the humans are actually way worse than that in terms of predicting those
Correct.
dates, because they'd forget to update it or
Hmm.
whatever, or just put an arbitrary date in, and
Yeah.
almost made us rethink that whole, well, why is that date? Why are we asking humans to make that prediction anyhow if we can,
Correct.
because what we want is a larger aggregate thing. So it's really redesigning that process a little bit. But yeah, what was important was thinking through, well, what are we expecting the minion to sort of, contribute to?
And we're going to see the very same conversation around self-driving cars and self-driving taxis very, very soon. And
Mm-hmm.
especially with companies like Waymo and Cruise that are, racking up hundreds of thousands, if not millions of hours at the moment, we will have hard data that says how one type of a taxi is safer than the other, right? I don't want to sort of kind of get. Well, I know that it seems it's the self-driving taxis that are safer. So it's not a speculation anymore, right? We have this hard
Mm-hmm.
data. Just like it might still be scary that a self-driving taxi can occasionally hit and perhaps kill a human,
Mm-hmm.
but if it does it less often than one that is driven by a human, then perhaps we
Yeah.
should still, trust the machine.
Yeah, yeah. So you're a Tesla driver, right? And I was a pretty early
Mm.
Tesla adopter.
Yeah, yeah,
And, engaging with that automation was, a fascinating, because I came from that safety critical systems engineering
that's
background.
right.
Initially as an engineer, you almost, oh, let's give this a crack,
Yeah,
and even when I test drove the vehicle, the salesman was, oh yeah, put it in autonomous mode, just in the
yeah,
60K streets. And
yeah,
now knowing how that system works, this is absolutely not designed, well, at that
yeah,
time, for that situation. But that whole thinking about how do I operate now as a supervisor of this
yeah.
autonomous mode of the system's fascinating, right? It's
Absolutely. And there are moments where you will be absolutely happy to turn on, some of the
yeah,
self-driving functions. There will
yep,
be other moments you will not feel comfortable doing this. As an
yeah,
anecdote, I had access to the smart summon function. I didn't pay for it. Tesla
mm,
gave access to me for a month or so, so that at a shopping center car park you could sort of bring the car to
yeah,
you. I had it available to me for a month. I never used it. I went a number of times to a
I've never
shopping,
used it either.
center car park, and I thought maybe this day, but I just felt so uncomfortable about it.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that
yeah,
was just too far for me. Same background, Kelvin, sort of understanding how those systems work. So like, no, there's no way I can trust that. I don't
yeah.
want a scratched car, right? But
No,
people
no.
use it, right?
But the
So,
flip side, on the motorway, I
yeah,
absolutely rely on it, because I
correct.
feel less fatigued and more like I've got another safety mechanism
That's
collaborating with
right.
me, because I
That's
can't
right.
respond as quickly to that car braking in front of me, right,
That's
as what
right.
that
Yeah,
computer can. So yeah, it's an
that's
interesting.
correct. Hmm.
Yeah. So yeah, your one of your chapters there at the end, continuous evolution, about, we talked about rethinking. Again, people very easily dive into, oh, here's just the easy things to do. We just got the current processes and we
Hmm.
maybe make them more 10% efficient. But I think the really interesting challenge, and you sort of put out in the book, is what are those new propositions, the new ways of doing business that this unlocks? Yeah, if you got some examples there to chat about that.
Absolutely. Well, look, the big question is what is possible that wasn't possible before? That's really the question. And so the moment you position this like that, you shift from 10% improvements, 5% improvements into into creating completely new ventures. And there is an example that I wrote about in the book, and I like to keep coming back to it because it's a sort of unexpected, unusual example. It's a small and medium enterprise north of Brisbane here in Queensland, Australia. A company called Watkins Steel, a steel fabricator.
Yeah, they're really
I'm in love with them, right? I'm in love with them. They're a family business, cutting steel, welding steel, providing steel components to builders. But about 10, 15 years ago, they decided that they want to explore potential impact of technologies, and they played with technologies like LiDAR, so laser scanning of various areas, virtual reality, augmented reality, and so on and so on. And at some stage, they asked themselves, what is possible that wasn't possible before, now that we use LiDAR for scanning of building sites? And one of the impacts on this organization is they realized they could offer a new service. They could scan real life objects. They could simulate real life objects. So now councils hire them to scan trees that are next to construction sites and then overlay an upcoming building next to a tree so that they can tell the council whether there'll be any branches of a tree that are too close to the building that need to be trimmed so before a building is approved. And this is just one example of what they're doing. But the beautiful of this example, and I could give a dozen examples like that right now, the beautiful part of those examples is that they have nothing to do with steel fabrication anymore. So this organization, Watkins Steel, carved out a completely new industry for themselves. And now, if everyone in the world stops buying steel, not sure if it's ever going to happen, but imagine that situation. They're not going out of business because they have this additional stream of revenue that emerged just because they needed a better way of scanning building sites so that they could produce steel frames in the right size, right? But now they're just expanded so much. So that's the continuous evolution. That's the what's possible that wasn't possible before that we need to keep asking whenever we introduce new technologies.
Yeah, and I guess, in many of the organizations you work with, many of them are probably larger organizations as well. And some of those come with those sort of change management sort of challenges, right? Like how do I, again, this literacy thing, how do I take my organization on this journey of value creation and that sort of bold future? But you have to take them on that journey. And it's almost, there's an element where you've got your startup and your entrepreneurs charging off, establishing these new business and testing these business ventures.
Yeah.
And then oftentimes I feel it's those, I have this gut feel that, only a small proportion of the population are the real change makers, and they've got to create that vision of a better place for others to sort of join in. Yep. And oftentimes you get that in startups, not so much in the larger organizations, but the large organizations, as you point out in the book, have that value of customer base and, the market distribution channels and all these other things that are really important. So what's your experience around sort of moving those organizations towards that direction, or do they fall back to sort of an acquisition or a skunk works sort of element that spins out of their business?
So everything that I'm going to say now is going to come back to one person in an organization, which is the CEO. So there's sort of two ways of thinking about what you just brought up, Kelvin. So first of yes, I've worked with a number of large organizations where the CEO would say, "Hey, Marek, nothing's fixed, everything's up for change in our organization, we need to completely transform our organization. Well, if a CEO, and I've had a number of conversations like that, comes to me with like a message like that, I would say like, well, maybe you should just sell your business and then sort of invest the money into a completely new, new venture. If this is what you're thinking, right, that nothing stays, right? You actually should think about your organization as, all those assets that you have, data, physical assets, your people, your brand, and so on, as something that you want to build upon, right? And so that's exactly what I argue, that for large organizations, they need to think about their legacy as something that's actually very positive, right? And we have this a research paper in which we show how this becomes a spine of transformation. It's like your own business, you kind of identify that spine and then you unfold around that spine, just like Watkins Steel. All the measurements, everything that they're doing it for the very same customers that they did all the work with Steel. They're doing it with the same people, the same staff, and the same technologies, right? So that spine becomes very important. So that's one part of my answer. The other part of my answer, I'll be very quick with this, is I've also found that all of the successful transformations that I've seen really started with an overly excited CEO, a CEO that is part of the process, that it's continually sort of projecting their excitement about the future to the rest of the team. I've seen way too many organizations trying to transform where the CEO would say, let's create that skunkwork teams and let them work and figure out what we should be doing. And then they would sort of take the step back or a back seat and just observe. This does not work. That lack of engagement of the top sponsor in the organization is, in my view, the highest or the biggest predictor of failure of those transformation initiatives.
And it's interesting, like with some of the organizations we're working with, is who's advising them on the technology side, because really it comes back to a business transformation thing, right? It's but you often find some of those organizations lack some of the skill set to tap into as a trusted advisor that can advise on some of the, basically to provide the literacy to feed into those decision makers in the organization, right? For them to bounce their ideas off and whatnot. And I've seen that one of the challenges. And you go out, even finding skills in Australia now that really have a good understanding of hey, I've got the technology expertise, but I'm the translator for business decision makers, right? That's a really tricky skill in this space. The other thing you sort of talked about in that chapter was about building the digital ecosystems and the APIs. And so I guess, what we're seeing this in the past 6 months or so is agentic AI is really starting to boom. But I guess that's got other challenges, right? Of now it's got some agency, right? To go out beyond the human. So in some ways, I think, we're struggling just around this human in the loop and embedding AI into our human processes. Where do you think we're going to end up with the agentic side, where the AI is getting let loose a little bit more?
It's getting let loose a little bit more, and it also is joining larger groups of those agentic AI systems that are now trying to figure out how to communicate with one another, how to coordinate those tasks, and so on. So, look, I tend to think about it as early days of the internet, where we haven't yet agreed on all the protocols that we're using. Everyone's experimenting a tiny bit, sort of like from now, it doesn't look as messy as it was, back then in the 80s and 90s. Everyone had their own ideas of protocols for everything, right? And then sort of some major protocols emerged, right? And I think we're going to see exactly the same situation at the moment. The sort of the initial period of messiness. Exciting in some ways, but also messy, unpredictable, and so on. But then, those sort of like major protocols will start emerging, and agentic AI systems will need to exchange data with one another. They'll need to orchestrate those activities, and so this will all come. I'm very excited about it. I do have a student who's currently looking into agent interaction patterns, just like in workflows, business process, models. You have your sort of, or splits and end splits, and and or joins and end joins, and all those loops and whatnot. We don't have that language for agents just yet, so so we're also looking into it. So yeah, messy until it's not messy.
Yeah, it's interesting on that point. One of our customers are in the B2B space, and they've got a bunch of key stakeholders that, draw, information and products out of this business. And part of when we talked about that literacy part is not just about the literacy of their own organization, but how do they, build up the literacy of their customers to actually extract this content out, in more effective ways. And I think it's even that digital ecosystem you talked about. We really don't know the way, when we provide, the information out, how our customers are necessarily, traditionally we'd build a website and we really control how they get presented that information. But I think in the agentic style is the way we open up our APIs to our customers. We probably won't know entirely the way they want to draw out our information and services, right? It's going to be a fascinating space.
You're right. And you use the term API a number of times. I think this is the basis of what we'll see. So it's the APIs going into kind of the next generation of APIs. I did a couple of years ago speak at an API conference, API Days, and I talked about this sort of that next level or next generation of APIs, and I talk about B2A to B, so those algorithms, or AI in between businesses. And I have to tell you, a lot of API experts, they came to me after the session and said, like, Marek, I hadn't thought about it like this, right? I followed AI, but never thought that like this could change our API. So I think there's a lot of literacy that we'll have to also develop in that space. But it's going to be exciting, definitely.
Yeah. So I was just looking through some of the questions. Like, I use AI every day. I still do quite a bit of coding myself, and now I'm just astounded using Cursor to do my coding. And that's not just building an app, but actually working with quite a large code base to modify it. And I would say it's doing 80% of the work, but it's really changing my role in doing that work now, right? And I think that's one of the things in our company is going back to our staff, and we've definitely got that across our staff about level of literacy and trying to move them forward. On one side, we help our customers, build, trusted AI, but then we just do a lot of testing of traditional systems, and we have to think about, well, how is AI impacting our jobs? And you sort of talk about that element of growing a business is, we're a big family in our company, and we want to sort of create that skill to move everybody ahead. So it's not about the minions, as you say, taking away the jobs, but what's the amplification skills that we create within our staff to grow the business? That's the really tricky bit, right? So yeah, your experiences on, there's that fear element of some staff, right? About, you're just doing this work because you're trying to make me redundant, sort of thing. You talk about that a bit, don't you?
No, exactly. And this is an immature approach by businesses, right? Employers, not employees, employers, when if they were introducing those technologies to make people redundant. It's different, right? You introduce those technologies to be able to scale up, not just sort of scale up as in doing things faster, but also doing things better, smarter, in a more sophisticated way, right? I love the, I do have some concerns about using too much Gen AI for coding, and we're starting to see those. There's the two concerns that I have specifically is the limited context window of in a system, so you can write a big piece of code, but at some stage the system that has created the code by itself will not be able to comprehend its own code, and then it's only the human that can really truly, work with this. And I'm sort of going to, to talk to it in a second. The other approach that I have is, sorry, the other concern that I have is that uh, some of those systems, if they're created, like, AI can be really good at creating very efficient code that no one can understand. And so how do we maintain that code later on? So the sort of the delayed challenges.
Yep.
But really, I see ourselves, and whether it's coding or whether it's writing or any other sort of screen-based activities, I think we're becoming those sort of digital sculptors. We work with those creations that are created by Gen AI systems, but then we tell them, hey, modify it here, modify it there, right? I don't really like how it's slanting or so. So that's that's the kind of the digital sculpting that I actually. That's right. I enjoy it a lot. There are systems where I have very limited control. For instance, in image generation, that kind of ability to say, no, remove that extra finger, or, or sort of remove the bicycle from the background is very limited, right? It's frustrating, when you have that limitation. But other types of systems like software or text, it works very, very well. And that's actually very fulfilling because you are in control of the process, right? And you're a sculptor. I just love that.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, very much I've found that's a process that I'm working. And I was chatting with some of my other senior engineers about it, using the same sort of tools. And they're going, well, I'm inclined a bit more to work with the AI tool as an assistant rather than packaging up the work unit and giving it to a junior developer, right? Because they're more making themselves amplification, it's going to be quicker and create more value to have this automation assistant, and which is really an interesting one then about how we turn junior programmers into sort of senior programmers, right?
That's a massive challenge for managers and leaders now, right? And maybe back to defense and drills and saying, yes, we have better ways of doing things. Still, we're going to do it this way because of this and that and the future of our organization.
Yeah, but it's definitely a very different, because again, the AI is actually writing some of the code under your design instruction, and then you're falling back to the reviewer. You're doing the code walkthrough and sort of approving those changes, and then doing some of the testing of the changes made, going, does that work in that situation, and things like that. But at the moment, you were sort of doing it very interactively, because again, we're probably not so confident. But one of my gut feels is where we're heading with the large language models is we'll probably impact ourselves as a profession more radically before we impact some of the other professions, right?
Absolutely.
I think it's going to hit the coding space much more aggressively, because the companies building it are actually writing a lot of code and sort of more or less dog fooding their own systems.
Vested interest there, yes.
Yeah. So it's fascinating. So so actually back on that point, I prepped a little bit with deep research, around some questions for the topic, and I think we've covered off a bunch. But one of the things it says, where do you think we're going to be in 10 years? And I'm going, oh my God, I would never ask 10 years in the current environment, because I think it's moving so rapidly. But what do you think some of the where we're going to be in 5 years, and our level of literacy and preparedness for heading in that direction?
Yeah, so like you said, right, predicting what happens in 10 years is extremely hard and extremely risky. But I'm going to try to sort of share my view on things. So look, when it comes to Gen AI and all the progress and models becoming better and better, yes, great, absolutely, probably. Whether we'll reach AGI, probably not. I don't know. I don't want to speculate, because it's less relevant. What's more relevant is that over the next 10 years, I think we're going to see two things. People realizing the actual value from Gen AI in their work, in their organizations. And just like, the internet in the 90s was just a place for having your home web page, which was always under construction, and this type of things. 10 years after that, completely new industries that hadn't existed before emerged. So I'm expecting exactly that, right? Over the next 10 years, we'll see completely new industries, completely new types of value propositions that we hadn't seen before emerge. What are they? Look, I don't know. And even if I did, I wouldn't share that on the podcast, right? Because that'd be like, you want to invest in that space, but I don't know.
Mhm.
Now, the other aspect of it is, I think 10 years from now, we'll be looking back at tools like ChatGPT and the likes, and Claude and U.com. We'll be looking at them the way we're looking at Microsoft DOS right now. It's like, oh, wow, these were, we would reminisce how we used to work with keyboards and, and text screens. And now, the user experience is very different. So I think our user experience, the way we use those Gen AI tools will be very, very different.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the things, I sit there looking at those error curves, for each successive generation of the tools, and they're more or less halving their sort of error rates. But again, benchmarks can be a bit misleading and gamed quite a bit as well. But to me, it's that element of going, these things will continue to get more and more accurate and very reliable.
Yeah.
And across an extraordinary range of topics, right? Like, all of a sudden, I've got almost like an accounting person in my back pocket, and so on. But again, I think it's that way we sort of build up that trust and sort of integrate that information in. But it is quite profound, and certainly, being in technology for a long time, it's pretty remarkable sort of change in the way we build systems. So it's but even there in our business, I think we've got to stay on top of that innovation, to adapt. Basically, it's almost the Darwinian sort of survival of those with most ability to adapt, right, to the situation. It's but I'm an AI optimist. I'm not sure what you are, but I'm a cautious AI optimist, right? Of putting the right guardrails around things.
I asked ChatGPT who I am based on its interactions with me. It said that I'm an optimist, but a very skeptical one. So I like it, right? I'm a skeptical optimist. Whenever I see something fantastic, I think this is great. This is going to change the world. But is this true, right? So that's that's me.
Exactly. Well, thanks, Marek. We might leave it there. We've chatted for quite a while. Thanks for that.
Exciting times.
I found the conversation very insightful.
Thanks
To
for
our
having me.
audience, if you found this discussion valuable, be sure to like, subscribe, and share this episode with your network. KJR is committed to helping organizations navigate AI adoption with confidence. So if you're looking for expert guidance, you can contact us via our website below, and also we'll provide a bunch of links, including links to your book and other information, Marek, below.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Marek. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time for practical conversations on trusted AI adoption.